Okay, it's time to begin. I've been given the ready to go sign. So we're happy that you're with us this morning. Those who are with us online, welcome. And I hope everyone has had a good week, and we get to begin a new week right by worshiping God and studying His Word. So anyway, I'm glad that you're here. Hope everybody's doing well. I see some folks back that have been sick, and it'll be interesting to see what we have during worship time and this evening. I hope we're making progress in the positive direction of getting everybody back who can come. I want us to look at Exodus 20 this morning. I think this commandment, if you want to think of it as a commandment, it is one of the 10 Commandments. But it's an odd commandment, actually, in the sense of why it was given. Because I don't think, at least us in America, probably have a more difficult time relating and understanding this, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, and the purpose for which it was given. Because I would characterize us, I think I'm right on this, just from my experience and seeing people in general, but we're a very occupied people. And what I mean is there's lots that we're involved in. Americans have a high level of stress in their lives. And you ask, well, why? It's all the things I'm doing. We're spinning so many plates. And that may be a descriptor for you, I don't know. But I think generally speaking, we are culturally a people that is involved in a lot of things. And we look at that as a virtue. Okay, it's the idea of being active and busy. That's one of our common things we say to people, being busy. What does that mean, being busy? That's actually, if you're just busy, that's not necessarily a good thing. You could be spending your time on useless things. But when you say you're busy, often it is to describe the stress that I'm in that which I have to complete, or the list that I do. I was reading one book that said that we ought to make a list every day of the things we want to achieve. Okay? And so you make a list, whether it's 1 to 3 things or 5 things, and I want to mark these off because it gives a sense of accomplishment. But then another book that I read said don't do that because it raises your cortisol, your stress level thing, and that causes a lot of problems. And so the list over here by one psychologist and motivator and the idea of accomplishing recommends you a list to achieve, and it makes us feel that we've accomplished something and that we haven't just spent the day moving the wheels and gone nowhere. The other one says scrap the list and look at things a different way. Instead of making a list of things to check off. That might be one of the reasons the checklist is that how people look at religion, as a checklist. We've have been told, about grace and works. I suppose I lean toward works more than I do grace because of my culture and how I think as a person, right? If you don't achieve anything today or on your list, you haven't done it, how do you feel? If you have a list, and this is what you're going to do today, if you don't do everything that you have on the list, you don't check it, maybe you got 4 out of 5. How are you going to feel? Will you feel good because you got the 4, or will that 5 just bug you to death? And you'll feel like a failure because you made a list of 5 things, you got 4. So, partial success equals failure, right? So where are you on the activity scale? Are you as we say, really busy or not? Terry, where are you on the activity scale? Really busy. Well, what does that mean, really busy? You never accomplish what you set out to do. Yeah, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
I feel more bad about that. I didn't do something this week for somebody that
Yeah.
wanted to do, and I feel more about that than I do anything.
Yeah, I had to email a guy that we were trying to get together to meet for a little bit, and I finally wrote him back and said, I can't do it. I just can't do it. I'm busy. And that's how I feel, because I do have other things that I need to get done. But that's just the nature, I think, of our psyche, is the activity. Would you agree that you being busy gives you some sense of, value? Would you equate being busy, active, whatever, to value, human value, how you see yourself? Yes, no, some do. You ever thought about it in that way? I would almost think that if we're not active, we might feel guilty because we're not doing anything. Does that make sense or not? Right.
So, I mean, he had a list too. Spiritually a list he had to check off.
Yeah, that's true. Jesus, would you say Jesus is busy?
Absolutely.
Well, he never seemed too busy to do certain things.
But his family said he was insane. Well, he didn't have time to eat.
Yeah, that is a funny narrative about having your family think that you're crazy. That's another topic. We ought to explore that next time. But maybe there's something in the human psyche or condition that God anticipated, that we would be at work, that is, doing the things that we know need to get done, even the things of God, but in that effort and rush, we might lose sight of the purpose or the reason of why we're doing these things. That's what I struggle with a lot of times. Because you can whip out, you got that, and it all can kind of fade into the idea of just, activity. I'm a administrator at school, and there's always things to do, and I used to, when I began, it was, this is neat, I've never done this before. And now it's kind of like, tink, think, just shoveling paper in a sense. So I got to watch myself that there is a higher purpose at the university that we're trying to achieve. This is a part of it, but I can't allow the activity or the busyness to frame the bigger picture. And maybe God anticipated that about the human person, that they would consider their worth on their achievement. Think about that. Is my worth based on my achievement? I think my worth is rooted in what? Yeah, my worth is in my relationship to God. God's approval, God's acceptance of me. Now, we read in the Bible that there's various levels of ability that people have. That poses another problem for us as human beings, because we can think, because I can't do everything that this person does, that somehow I'm lower on the worthy scale. The man who had the talents, the 5 talent as opposed to the 1 talent man. Maybe one of his problems was, I can't do what these other people do, so I'll just what? Hide it and bury it, and then, here, you gave me something and I'm giving it back, but he was harshly rebuked because he didn't use it in his ability that God gave him. So, it's not the level of our abilities, or that one person can do that in the church or another person, can't do the other thing, and there could be some comparisons. I think that's all the devil operating in our minds, in the truth of the matter, because there is a problem of us understanding our worth to God, and we think the more we do, the more active we are, somehow we go up in the scale of value in God's eyes. And it might be the opposite, because God is longing for a relationship with you, not just to see you out there running, busy, even if it's a good thing. For instance, one of the challenges of a person who's a preacher full time is the struggle on the time for church work and the time for family. And the church is always in need of service and ministry and prayer, and there is a great pull on the mindset of the preacher that church work has priority over family. Not that he would actually admit it, but he will sacrifice, if he's not careful, the well-being of his children, his wife, and everything like that. But he has an excuse, right? Because he's engaged in what? God's work. Now, how can the kids and the wife fuss about that? How could, do what? No, I don't either. That's where we're going. That's not, I don't think that's biblical. If there is a priority, it would be what? His family. I mean, that seems to be priority, because he is to be the leader of his family, and he is to nurture and teach and raise those children. So there's got to be it's very difficult for men who are preachers to navigate that. I can remember when I first started preaching, I had mentors and teachers who really drilled this on me, because so many preachers were losing their families for the Lord. And the mentor, one of them was Paul T. and others, indicated that you have to have your family as your priority. And when my first work came, I talked to the elders about it, because, there's always a temptation for the elders to expect you to be the Apostle Paul and Jesus all in one. All your time, all your mind, everything. And you think about, well, where is the family, and where is rest? And so he told me, when those kids are young, when you have kids and all that, you commit to those, and you talk to your elders, and you say, hey, I'm going to have to pull back on some evening activity, and I'm going to try to go at things a little bit different, but I've got to be somewhat available for the family meal, evening, and things of that nature. And it was a challenge. And when I talked to the elders about it, it was kind of like, yeah, that's right. I think a preacher who is being involved in his family, but he's not neglecting the work. But members might think that, and elders could think that. So it took some discussion, and I've encouraged the men that I'm preaching to to go out and preach for us, to think of that as well, because it's very important. Now, I just used that as an example. It's not that preachers are the only ones who struggle with activity. This is where you find the phrase workaholic. I think man as a human being, male, is equipped to work. I think God has put that in our psyche, certain things that is representative of a male. That is the drive to work, or if you want to say, to kill, bring home, and feed, and to protect. That's this. There's this certain things that's in our nature that's going to happen. We don't have to think about it. So that's not all that we are to be, though. We have to also be very much involved in rearing and fulfilling the needs of our spouse, and so there's a lot of things. So in balancing and knowing my relationship with God, I have to navigate and refuse to be knocked off of that balance that I'm taking, because I could be a workaholic in the Lord's church and lose my family. I can be a workaholic in business and lose the family. That's a real thing among men, being a workaholic. Sometimes it becomes their full identity. And I would have to say, from a work perspective, a man's identity is connected to what he does, you know. And so for him to lose a job and things like that is devastating to a male. It can be suicidal devastating. And some don't understand that. You know, sometimes the female doesn't realize that, but that's the way God has made us. And I think men need to be examples of what this commandment is talking about. Now, I know we're talking about one of the 10 Commandments. We're going to read in just a minute. But the principle applies, has always applied. Yes?
Yeah, well, women have that problem too. You know, you take Martha and Mary.
Yeah.
You know, he came to her house, and Martha was busy because, you know, they're concerned about how the house is.
Yeah. And what they're preparing for Jesus. Yeah.
But, you know, he had to rebuke her because he said, you know, Mary was more concerned about the spiritual things, and you were more concerned about keeping the house clean, which is important.
Yeah.
The woman particularly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example, the difference between how Jesus commended Mary, but Martha was somewhat rebuked. But yet she was engaged in a good thing that we would all deem as very good, but not at that moment. It might be the idea of timing that's involved that calls for us to have wisdom to navigate these things. So, Americans are high on the tired list, the anxious list, the stress level. I don't know where you are. It's interesting when people talk about stress. But the idea of being burdened, you feel overwhelmed. You know, when you start feeling the sense of being overwhelmed, you're starting to experience that stress idea. And that's when the cortisone and those things in your body kick in. They complicate even more the problem. Well, what's God's solution to all this? Exodus 20 and verse 8. He says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God." This is Exodus 20, verse 8 on the sheet, if you're looking in your Bible. "In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and made it holy." Now, the word here, the idea of resting, doesn't mean that God was so tired from the activity of creating the universe that he said, "I've got to sit in my rocker chair for a while, read a book or something." That's not what he's saying. On God's perspective, God ceased the creation act. He stopped. He ceased. There was a time when he did what he did in 6 days, and then he stopped. That's rest. He stopped. Now, this then was used to inculcate in the mindset of the Israelites the idea of getting it done in 6 days, your labor. And then the Sabbath, stop, rest. And it wasn't, there were lots of elements that were involved in God doing that for human beings. The Sabbath was made for who? For the man. For human beings. The Sabbath was made for us, as Jesus would refer to it a little later. And Jesus was the Lord of the Sabbath, is another thing that's said about him. So, the question I have here, are we restless? What is restlessness, activity or busyness? Just to show you how it is sometimes. If I lay in my recliner and I lean back and I close my eyes and I'm tired, about 5 minutes I'm going to feel guilty. Why? I should be up doing something. Okay? So I'll get that recliner and I'll get up and start doing something. I don't think that's good. I need to learn to stop. And maybe there's something about it that I'm missing, but it's a struggle for me. I don't know if it is for you. Is that, do you relate it to that? Do some of y'all have that kind of feeling? I mean, it doesn't mean that everybody does. Probably some of you lean back in that recliner and you're out for, yeah. But I can never fall asleep or take a nap because I will begin to have those feelings and I start thinking about them. And I'll get up because it's like I'm missing out on something, or something's not going to get done, or it may be that I put value on activity, labor. So it's probably all three. Yes? Uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but that's, it may be, but I'm feeling guilty. That's what I've done. That's what I'm saying. There's something about me that I hadn't figured out yet. And so I struggle with that. Now, the idea of activity and being restless may lead to obsessive behavior, right? That's the danger of what rest counters, what ceasing counters. Because it's like anything else, you can develop a habit that can become a detrimental habit if we're not careful. I mean, it's just like anything else. I suppose one could be addicted to activity. And it gives, achievement and doing things. Maybe it produces the hormones that make you feel good and all that thing. And so it validates, yeah, I'm right because this is the way I feel good about myself, I've accomplished something. But you have to look at it in light of what it may be impacting in your relationship with God. Being restless may pave the way for reckless decisions. Would you agree that sometimes in making a decision, you might need more time to allow contemplation on it? It's not a sign of a strong leader or one who is very accomplished to necessarily make a quick decision. I mean, there's times when that has to be done, but some decisions need a little bit of contemplation, perhaps. And in that contemplation, you think about the things that Jesus did. In all of his activities, the Gospel of Luke tells us that he would often do what? Go away, engage in prayer for a while, and get away from everybody. Um, and so there was I think from the relationship of Jesus, or as an example, there are some things that maybe we can learn from that. But if we're rash in our decisions, I think our culture is like that. Our culture is reactive. They're not thoughtful. It's not critical thinking. Critical thinking requires a little bit of time, doesn't it? People look at something, they see something on the media, TV, and whoa, going out, and they're really upset or whatever, and then you learn the truth. The more details come out, and it's totally different than what you assumed to be true. How often does that happen? All the time, even recently, and lots of things that are happening. We see it all the time. So, quick decisions can lead to reckless activity or decisions. Number 3, being restless may simply reveal that we don't really trust God. Now, this may be more like it than anything else. Would you describe yourself as a practical person? Are you practical? What does practical mean? How would you define the idea of being practical? What? A realist? So, being practical, you see things as they are and you move in a pragmatic way, okay? It seems logical, reasonable, and it's how you ought to operate in this particular situation. Pragmatics, being practical. I always think, I've used this analogy before, but this is a good time to refer and refresh our minds about it. King Saul was told to wait for Samuel until Samuel came to offer sacrifice before he engaged in battle. King Saul did the most practical thing that anyone could do. In fact, it seems very reasonable. He forced himself to sacrifice based on what? His men were leaving and the enemy was building. So if you got your army and they're just waiting there and you see the increase of the armies, here they come, they're marching. They got their chariots, their horses, whatever. There's going to be a battle. And you got to give a pep talk, to your army. And you give it a pep talk and they're looking, they're looking, this, that, and they start leaving him. So what does he want to do? He's got to engage the enemy now. There's no delay. He has to do it now, or he's not going to have any army at all. They're going to be crushed. See, that's pragmatic thinking, isn't it? It's practical. It sounds reasonable. But as soon as he does this, Samuel shows up and rebukes him because he didn't wait. See, that goes against pragmatics. Because now you've got a different variable that's involved. It's faith. Why did God... Do you suppose this was a setup to reveal Saul? A test for him to show his faith? Would you, in that same situation, tell your army that are going to be in battle that you believe in God and you were told by the prophet to wait? We're going to win, but we're going to wait on God before we do anything. Yeah, I know it. Yeah. Am I deciding or am I asking? The idea of waiting on the Lord is a difficult concept, isn't it? Sometimes the timeline doesn't kind of jive with mine. So let's look at Matthew 6, verse 24 in regard to this anxiety, the stress, this restlessness that we might have. How does Jesus mitigate that? How does he? What does he want us to know to help us in the endeavor of seeing our value, and that it's not in how much you achieve or accomplish, but it is found in your relationship with God, how much God loves you. Does that change or reorient our mindset? Well, this is where we come to that famous passage, Matthew 6, verse 24. This is, we're in the Sermon on the Mount here. He says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. For this reason, I say to you, do not be" what? What do you have? Worried? What version is that? Worried. Huh? Okay, New American Standard. Anybody have anxious? Okay. Worried or anxious? Well, there seem to be describing the same thing. One may relate to you more than the other. I don't know. Do not be, if you're anxious or you're worried for your life, what are your thoughts? What would reveal the signs of being anxious or worried for your life? Scared? What? Overwhelmed? Maybe the panic gene kicked in? What else? Okay, let's keep reading. Do not be anxious for your life as to what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor for your body as to what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body than clothing? Think about that question. It's rhetorical. It's yes, of course, is the answer. But do we understand the question? What's he saying? Yes, John. Then, yeah, exactly. So, if the greater thing has been done, we would find that which would support it. That would be a natural. That would be understood. But as human beings, what do? We conflate or put it upside down, don't we? And if we put it upside down, where we make the things that should be understood to be true naturally because of the importance of life, if we do it upside down, what happens? What do we lose focus on? Yeah. In fact, not only that, but it starts to affect how we think about things. We become maybe more pragmatic. And I'm not saying being pragmatic is not a good and healthy thing at times, but we become more thinking as a human being, practical. This is the way it works. What I need to do, instead of keeping it as it should be, and allow that to guide your activity and direction and your well-being. Now, that's not an easy thing to do, is it? It's not easy. Okay, let's continue reading. So he says, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns. Yet your heavenly Father feeds them. So what's the lesson here? Yeah. The smallest things are taken care of. And if that's true, think of us as human beings. It's even more true. Charlie, you were going to say something? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In Matthew 10, verse 29, it says, there are not two sparrows sold for a farthing. In Luke's account, he says, there are not five sparrows sold for 2 farthings. So if you buy 4, you get one thrown in at 3, because they're a little value.
That's right.
But if God takes care of those birds, surely he'll take care of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the arguments that Jesus is using are very, mind-changing in putting that which everybody knows and understands, everything in its place in the value scheme. And you have to understand, even from the book of Genesis, let us make man in our image. And we have the creation that, as we've said, you have the habitat, and then you have the inhabitant that's put in each of the habitats. So God's going to do what God does. So we looked at the birds. Now here's something else, 27. And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single cubit to his lifespan? Now, okay, let's think of it this way. Why is it that we are anxious and worried about things that are out of our control? Isn't that where a lot of anxiety comes? Is that it's out of my control. But I try to bring it in my control, and the way that I do that is through worry and anxiety. Think about it. You can't be anxious to add a single cubit to his lifespan. One of the things that we have to understand about life in antiquity that even makes it even more revealing is most of the people are day laborers. And as a day laborer, you wait to be hired to go out in the field, or whoever would hire you. Okay, and you get paid for that. And that's what you had for that day for your family. What if you didn't get hired that day? What about the next day? How do we approach this idea of being a day laborer? It puts in real focus how dependent I am on God. And in reality, God is the one who provides and will provide. And verse 28, and why are you anxious about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory did not clothe himself like one of these. I always like how comparisons made to what God does and then what humans try to do. When you look at the environment around us and how things are done, how life cycles around every season and things of that nature, God's involved in all of that. Set it in place. Verse 29, yet I say unto you that even Solomon, we already read that. But if God so arrays the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, will he not much more do so for you, old men or people of little faith? Notice that statement. If God so arrays the grass of the field, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And yet, that arrayment of grass and all of that provides, it grows, and then what happens? It's eaten. You know, it's done with it. You know, the flower comes and boom. You know, if so much effort was put in that which didn't last very long, on such a, what we might think of as a small scale, think about us in our relationship with God and that which God has provided for us. I mean, it's just on the scale of worth and all of this. He nails the problem, O people of little faith. So it's really, worry and anxiety is connected somewhat to a faith issue. Now, that's challenging. Because how do I understand? I think it's natural for us to worry about things. I think it's natural for us to have stress over certain things. And I don't think that God is telling us to look at things in a nonchalant way at all. But in the ultimate construct of my attitude and my view of life and how everything is, I've got to understand that faith has something to say. Faith has a way of forming my view of things and how I react to the environment around me. He says, do not be anxious then, saying, what shall I eat, or what shall I drink, or with what shall we clothe ourselves? For all these things the Gentiles eagerly seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all of these things. Verse 33, which we're all familiar with, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be what? Added.
That reminds me of a good when she
Yeah.
had 2 mites, and she gave everything she had to live on to the Lord. You know, the interesting thing about that is you don't have the conclusion to that story.
Mhm.
We have to come up with our own conclusion.
Right.
What happened.
Mhm.
But I feel like God took care of it no matter what.
Yeah.
I feel like if we starved to death, you know, some people said Christians can't starve to death. Well, Paul said he went around hungry. I mean, I think Christians can starve to death. They're like, just like you got a heart attack or anything else.
Right.
But it's where your faith is. I mean, God still will take care of it.
Mhm.
I mean, that widow was taken care of one way or the other.
Some might have criticized, though, what she gave. Huh, Greg? Therefore, do not, but seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. Therefore, do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So how many of you right now, your mind's in tomorrow? Next week? You know, a few months down the road. Okay, let's move from there in the short time we have. Why we need to take a break. What does it mean? The Sabbath, or the Sabbath, as they say in Israel, does not mean Saturday. That's not what it means. It is a day on the calendar that may coincide to our Saturday, but it means rest. That's its meaning, rest. You work 6 days, you rest. Rejecting rest doesn't mean that we don't need it. Think about that as one of the principles of our human existence. I think of your children when you were raising them when they were little. Sometimes you had to make them nap. You knew better, or you knew what they needed, and they would just fight it. You had kids when they were young, and they would fight sleep. I mean, I guess we had just rambunctious kids. I don't know. They would fight it, and it's funny that in the fighting, the sleep would actually, come over them eventually. But it's like that's a metaphor of human existence. We kind of fight the idea of rest. But God has made us in a way that we need it. I like Psalm 23, verse 2 sort of comes into focus here. He makes me lie down. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet water. He makes me lie down. He restores my soul. Mark 6, verse 30. And the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that he had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourself to a lonely place and rest a while. Now, what I'm picking up from this commandment of Sabbath, which was for the Jews, is the principle that's involved. And that is, there is time to stop. And particularly for us as Christians, we don't have the commandment to keep the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Yet, if you think about the instructions that we have in the Scripture, it is never commendable to just be involved in activity and work without time of reflection and communication with God. Time to cease. New Testament doesn't give us any like time frame. There's a time, though, in our construction in which we cease. So what are the benefits of ceasing activity, and what should we do? 3 quick things. Number one, it's to protect us. God knows us. We've been created. Number 2, it's time to pause. Jesus would go and pause, stop, and rejuvenate, and the way that he did that was in his connection with his Heavenly Father. It's a time also to proclaim who we are. That's one of the things that happened in the Sabbath and the keeping of it, was the proclamation of the identity of Israel. Not allowing the secular world to define worth. Rest helps us to keep things in perspective. And we evidently need that, because we can allow the activities in the world to sort of, influence us in a negative way. All right, my time's up. So anyway, you can't have any rebuts or rebuttals or anything like that. That was planned, by the way.